Hi, this is Dom from Badwater. I just wanted to share an observation I have about something that's kind of close in my life. The topic for this video is about a confusion of duty for wildland firefighters. In fire, I've seen a lot of people source their pride and a lot of their self-respect from a few things. That they're serving communities, that they're helping protect lives and property, being able to direct other people in their crew, have that type of leadership and that responsibility. And then it's as simple as serving a group of like-minded individuals toward a larger goal. And that's where a lot of the respect and pride comes from. And the last one is just being in a very unique and very cool and very physical job. This is all great, but there's a large limitation to sourcing your pride and your self-respect from this line of work because it only sustains us while we are doing that work. It's stripped from us when we are laid off after the summer and we spend our 6 months in the off season. When we get those unemployment papers, any type of sense of duty that we had to our larger community is gone. We're told, hey, you're not being paid anymore, you're done, we don't care where you go. And when we are off duty, we are off duty even to ourselves. Nearly every R&R, I'll see at least 1 or 2 people going off on self-destructive benders. And this is really common for wildland firefighters. They might be drinking, or they're gambling, or they're avoiding any type of self-care during those days off. I've even seen people stop drinking and start improving their lives, but some of them default to going into cryostasis during those R&R days. Those 3 days are them just sitting in front of a TV waiting for the next assignment to happen. It almost feels like people are just trapped in this one setting for the whole summer, and then they try to do a lot of catch-up again. When the duty evaporates, a firefighter's proactiveness disappears as well. Of course, this is not all firefighters. There's always exceptions, and this is not the rule, but it is an observable section of fire, of people that are new to fire, that don't really have any kind of handle on what they could do during their R&R days or during the assignments to spiritually develop themselves, professionally develop themselves. There's no strong guidance, so people start spinning their own wheels. But even after those firefighters have set themselves into cryostasis for 6 months, they're let go for 6 months of the year, left to fend for themselves. And during that time, for the more lost folks out there, that's a really long time to not have much of a direction and just be drawn into the wilderness of a lonely mind. What I've noticed is that the way we structure Wildland Fire in this point in time is that all the nobility, all the duty is attached to the uniform, and right when you take off that uniform, it's gone. And there are so many voices trying to bridge that gap of being out of uniform and still having the sense of duty to self and to others. But it's very hard, especially the way that the government system works for firefighters. Firefighters, right into their off season, are pretty much told to fuck off until the next summer. How does that allow a firefighter to think that they should develop themselves in any way on their own time? I think that this all causes confusion for new and seasoned firefighters for what they are doing on and off the clock. If you have a professional system where you spend 100% of your mind being a professional and being duty driven during your job, and right when you stop getting paid for that, you just drop off, there must be something wrong with the culture. So I just want to go over my history with fire and where I came from to find these observations. In 2019 and 2020, I joined a conservation corps. I was on a prescribed fire crew as a crew leader. We worked with the Forest Service and we helped burn thousands of acres. It was actually a very positive time. There's always logistical confusion over prescribed burns, especially if something's not organized that well. But you know that that is just something to work on over time, especially for trainees that are new to the whole thing. And then in later 2020, I moved to Western Colorado, where I was on a trails crew, but I would scab onto an engine every weekend. This gave me a different perspective of fire, where I was just working personally with the captain of an engine, and he would tell me how, to him, fire is a dark side. He just wanted more money for his family. And that's fine. Sometimes you just need a better paying job. That's why I joined fire after working in trails for so long. But you started seeing just a little hint of cynicism in there. And then in 2021, I joined an engine crew in Southwest Montana. Almost everyone was new. This was during that time where a whole bunch of turnover was happening because of the lack of pay. And it was just a year before we got that 50% retention bonus. But from having all these new people on the job, there was a whole bunch of optimism. Everyone was excited about anything that was being done. And they were excited about the adventure and the pull of the wilderness being closer to nature, especially since we were very remote. So we felt a lot more connected with nature. But I would say that because we were a very remote engine, our responsibilities and duties to the people around us were very limited because we knew that these were wilderness fires. So we didn't really think much about the property and lives that we were saving. But that was also when I started seeing heavy alcoholism by higher up people. And this became a theme for the next few years of seeing people that have spent 5+ years in fire become heavy drinkers, or maybe they always were. I always think that the word cryostasis is relevant to fire because of the lack of pressure for wildland firefighters to develop themselves professionally, spiritually, in any way. The 6-month on, 6-month off season structure causes this type of stop and go that can sometimes stunt a person's personal growth. In 2022, I became a wildland fire apprentice in Northern California. And that's where I was able to have a stronger relationship with my captain and engine operator. I really liked the people on the engine, but I couldn't handle that cynicism anymore, and I had to leave by the end. So I had to cut short my wildland fire apprenticeship. The next year, I joined a hand crew nearby and found a very different dynamic where passions are raised over the cynicism. And even though there might be that type of cynicism where you kind of find there's pointlessness in your job, you still have the passions to perform above and beyond. And this is where I realized that the ego can power someone's high performance, even if they don't have duty. And this is where I saw that after 4 seasons in fire, I found very few duty-driven people. I found very ego-driven people. And that's fine because we're still getting results. But what I didn't see was this larger ideal of serving others. What I also saw in this hand crew were people that were recovering alcoholics and some active alcoholics. I think that the leadership inside this hand crew, even though you have these sharp edges of people's personalities, especially in blue collar work, there was leadership there that was very inspiring. They were actively trying to inspire people out of the holes and the stuckness people get when they get into fire. So after my first year on that hand crew, seeing a lot of anger and passion that fueled the crew, most everyone was replaced with very new people, and the crew's dynamic turned very optimistic, inexperienced, but very optimistic. Just like my experience in Montana, there's so much potential for maintaining this excitement and this optimism for fire. So I want to define duty. I believe that duty is like a motor that someone acquires to be able to do things that a normal person wouldn't have wanted to do, but to do it with grace, with a type of effortlessness, even though it is so much effort. When you see this person who's driven by duty, you see something larger inside themselves, as if something bigger is happening, even though they're just digging dirt at that moment. Even when they're in the shitty shit, they seem to exude this aura of largeness. And those are when you see those pictures of heroism. I think duty and grace are intertwined. And as I said before, ego is a motor. But when ego is a motor, you don't see that grace anymore. With ego, you usually rely on fear or anger to drive your actions. So you can still perform with high performance. But you know that that performance is being derived from fear, anger, and you see this stuttering, start and stop, all this passion, but it is an ugly passion. And that's fine because you still get the results done. And most people are going to be driven by ego. Even if you join the military at the moment, you're mostly going to find other people are driven by ego and ambition to perform very well. There's very few people out there that are duty driven. But lastly, what I wanted to think about with ego driven performance is that it typically has a lot of self victimization going on. You perform well, but then you start having this judgmental eye for others that don't perform well. And so you start thinking that you're carrying everyone on your back. This is the ego saying, I performed highly, so everyone else should. And if they don't, I'm going to start judging. And there is no grace in that. The grace of duty is that they themselves were internally driven to do this thing. It wasn't in relation to other people. So we are positioned as a noble profession wildland firefighting. Since we have all this danger and beautiful results for communities when we contain the fire, but repeatedly I've seen lower ranks laugh at this nobility. And why would they laugh? Why would they reject the respect that is inherent in this job? It's because they don't actually see the respect. They see these signs saying, thank you, firefighters, but they don't actually see any kind of thanks from their own employer. When you're actually on the line, you start minimizing the dangers that are occurring. You think that the dangers are far off, and that's typically why people act like boiled frogs, because they try to normalize a situation even though it's not normal. So we belittle our own experiences in relation to fire. We just say, that's not that dangerous. Because if we start actually saying, yeah, I'm doing super dangerous things, someone's going to make fun of you because there's a certain type of competitive one-upmanship. So you might as well have this false humility of saying, nothing's dangerous, this is a safe job. We have low pay, we have high hours, and more importantly is that we spent years without being actually recognized as wildland firefighters. We were recognized as forestry technicians. The joke was that you always live as a forestry technician and then you die a firefighter. The only way to actually be recognized for the job that you're doing is through the self-sacrifice, the ultimate self-sacrifice. But recognizing them as forestry technicians for decades also ignored their right to workers' compensation if they had cancer due to fire. Since it wasn't directly in the job description about sucking smoke, you had to fight uphill to get any kind of compensation if you were starting to die from your job. As a wildland firefighter, it's automatically recognized that you're sucking in smoke and you might develop cancer in the future, and there is more support for you to be able to apply to workers' comp. During the shoulder seasons, there's no training for us to develop ourselves professionally outside of the job. We pause our lives for fire for 6 months, and then suddenly we're let go, and then we have to figure out what to do next. Having no training to prepare yourself outside of fire is the ultimate slap in the face. Once you're let go, you're cut off from health benefits, like your insurance that you got through the government. They say thank you, and then now figure out what you need to do after this. How could people have pride in their duty to others when they have a job that wants to undermine them in every aspect in their lives? Pay them low, don't give them benefits, even though they've given so much during the 6-month period. Maximize the hours that they work, and have them fight for their H-pay and their overtime and their hours. We have these new firefighters that are joining an unsupportive and jaded system that implicitly laughs at their duty to others. Their employer is not loyal at all to their well-being in and out of the uniform. It's almost embarrassing to be prideful of that type of job if you have so many people laughing at you and so many people trying to say that you're not actually even really a firefighter. So the new firefighters default to being cynical. It's easier to fit in and it's easier to cope with the job that you just accepted. Cynicism bleeds into the culture of fire, and pointlessness has been a theme I've seen all 5 years that I've been in fire. And I don't think it's normal. When I worked for USAID and I worked for FEMA, there were a lot of issues logistically and interpersonally that each of these jobs had, but they were always so optimistic about what they were doing for other people. They took a lot of pride in their support of their community and their clients. People loved being in those jobs and they loved what they were doing for other people. It was a very exciting time to be in. And somehow you go over to Wildland Fire and you just get the opposite. You just are fighting uphill the whole time to have that respect and pride over a job that is doing good things for other people. So after a 2-week period on an assignment, we come back and we try to catch up with our lives because for some reason, our 2 weeks that we gave to the government and to other people wasn't part of our lives. It seems like we paused it and we're just waiting for it to be over so we can continue our lives 3 days at a time. Isn't there something wrong going on when we can't consider those 2 weeks we've given, those 2 weeks that we were professionals, and we don't consider it part of our lives, that we actually have to catch up because we missed part of our life? And then unfortunately, some of those people, like I said, sit there for 3 days, waiting until the next assignment, either drinking or not drinking, watching TV, or on their phone. They're just waiting for the next thing, and then they're back into the wintertime, and then they go back to their phone and their TV and alcohol again. It's all the same. They always think that it's going to get better this time, but it's a cycle. It's a circle. Very few people slowly start getting out, or they just completely quit the game and figure something else out. But for the people that have been in the cycle for many years, it looks like they are put into that cryostasis on a personal level, even when they're being pushed up in responsibility. It feels as if they are still living in their early 20s. Then by the end of the fire season, people start thinking that they've wasted their entire summer season. And they always keep on thinking, this is my last season because I got to actually do something for once. It's as if people signed up for a prison camp. Then they're looking at this off season and trying to figure out what they can do to catch up on life again. Sometimes I don't really think that people are catching up. I feel as if they are dealing with a type of guilt that's inside themselves. Maybe it's a guilt that they have spent their time on something that gives nothing back to them except for cash. Maybe they feel guilty for giving up 16 days from their loved one, and they're reminded by the federal government that it really was wasted. There's nothing to gain from those 16 days. There are white-collar companies out there that help pay for their employees' personal development, spiritual development, and physical development. They pay for people's mental health retreats, and these companies give people days off so they can recuperate or go to a wedding or see their family. By default, it's encouraged rather than punished. In Wildland Fire, the job is trying to extract as much time as possible from you during the summer season and try to pay this sunk time at bottom dollar. And then the employees spend their off days in resentment of their employer. These have just been my observations of certain people, certain sections of firefighters in federal wildland firefighting. When you get to boots on ground, you only see cynical jokes. And recognize that these cynical jokes help cope with what we've given ourselves. All the crew members are able to connect with each other through the shit that they've gone through and the lack of support that they get. It's the best part of the job, honestly, that we get to connect with each other and use our employer as an antagonist. Personally, I am on the group that this is a unique and cool job, and I'm happy to do the work in order to find the adventure and find our connection with nature through this job. I love hard work. I may not be driven by that duty. I am certainly driven by fear. I'm driven by my ego to perform well for my crew. And that's all right. As I said, when I see the magic and grace of someone who's driven by duty every once in a while, it's a beautiful thing to see. And I know that it can happen more if we fix our cultural issues. And these cultural issues are not coming from bottom to top. It's coming from top to bottom. The institutional lack of support for firefighters in the federal government is what's causing these issues. It belittles people. It makes people think that they don't deserve anything more than what they are getting at the moment. I do think that these cultural issues can be fixed by certain policy changes and different types of support you can have for a firefighter. So I just want to list off things that are practical and things that are more idealistic. I think that you should recognize all primary and secondary fire personnel as wildland firefighters so that those health protections can be existing for everyone. Right now, we're coming up to an issue where a bunch of secondary fire personnel have been fired from the Forest Service. They still were integral to the operations of fire, yet they were fired anyway. So recognizing all of them as actual wildland firefighters would have prevented this. Raise our pay enough that you can actually be selective with who can come into your crews and into your fire positions. Using time and grade to give more responsibility to someone has an upper limit because some people just are never ready for the higher responsibility. Sometimes you need to hire a very qualified person for a large paycheck that can do the things safely and efficiently. I think that there should be off-season job support. When you're coming into the end of the season, that there is a process for people to apply to other positions in the government or support a funnel for people to go into other jobs in the local area or around the country. Find a network of employers that want to hire wildland firefighters because of their performance and what they do for the country. If someone's not able to find a job through this program, they should still be eligible for year-round health benefits at the very least. Having to switch on and off health insurance every 6 months is an absolute nightmare. Having to switch my primary care physicians and not know which hospitals I'm going to be eligible for anymore, it's a complete mess. I've now switched my health insurance at least 10 times in the last decade. It's crazy. And then training for the off season during the shoulder seasons. Maybe it's just giving time to employees to have some online or in-person training so they can be ready for something in the off season. There are people that were very proactive in my crew that were studying for their EMT and other medical certifications throughout the whole year. And that's great. If you're going to have the 6-month on, 6-month off structure, you need to give people time to apply and train for jobs in the off season so they can gracefully transition from one side to the next. Taking all their time throughout the summer and then suddenly cut them off, there's no grace. There's no wonder why someone doesn't have a duty to themselves or others in the off season when they have no support from the federal government, when they have no support from others. I think that duty and grace will only be apparent again in fire when the country affirms their loyalty to wildland firefighters, as firefighters have sacrificed and affirmed their loyalty to the country. When we have more benefits and more support, we will support ourselves even more because we can have the time to do it. And we can feel as if our duty doesn't end even in the off season because our ties to the community still exist through our support. I'm coming up on my 6th season in fire, and all of these observations over the years are kind of building up. It's now a little too apparent, especially the cynicism. It was something that I started thinking about more the last couple of years because we deserve more for ourselves. We deserve to treat ourselves better, and we deserve to be treated better. I'm really optimistic that there will be good changes in the future. There's a lot of advocates for firefighters. I believe the greater good should include us as firefighters. I believe that our sense of duty will grow when the country finds a sense of duty to support us. And I hope that's soon. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.